Hey folks, this is the GONet tutorial for the Rollerball Multiplayer Edition. This is going to be for the Unity 3D game engine. It's a new tool that's come out, GONet. It's the game object networking library that is going to take all of the pain away. So we'd like to start with this simple rollerball tutorial that a lot of folks are probably familiar with, or if you're completely new to Unity, you may be looking at rollerball tutorial for the first time, but it's something that Unity produces, and the GONet team thinks that it's a great idea to start with something simple, build onto the simple concepts, and you can see pretty quickly here as we go through the tutorial that we can get into some more complex situations, and everything's going to be possible with GONet. So let's get right in. We're going to start from zero, which let's just go ahead and open up this. We're going to create a new project. We're going to choose 2019.1.11 F1. There are some newer versions out, I believe 2019.2. Whatever the new monthly installment number is right now. But we're just going to go ahead and go with this. We're going to call Rollerball GONet. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and place it there. So I'd like to keep it real. You know, there's some scripted things that I'm prepared to go through, but just like you, I'm a real person, so you might see that I'll run into a couple of hiccups along the way, but we're going to recover from it. We'll figure it out together, and you'll be better off in the end because you know that this is a realistic kind of scenario. So as this loads in, it's just going to be the standard 3D assets, kind of a baseline install to get going on any project. And then as soon as it's available, we're going to go open up into the asset store, and that's where we're going to locate the rollerball demo. So I've searched for this before a time or two, so we're going to go ahead and get rollerball right there. You can see this one here. It's Unity Technologies produces it, rollerball tutorial. It is a complete project, and it is free, which is wonderful, which also is the case for GONet. We're going to go ahead and import it. It gives you a little bit of a warning about bringing in and replacing all of your project settings with the ones inside of the rollerball demo, but that's okay. We don't have anything going on that's special that will be overridden anyway. So let's go ahead and import that. We're going to go ahead and install, do everything that it asks us to do. We just want to get the rollerball baseline functionality in here. Give it a shot. I do recommend that quite often, is if you're going to be bringing in some new functionality into your project, don't do too many things at once. In this case, we see everything that they want to give us. I would venture a guess that a lot of this stuff doesn't really have any importance to rollerball. The main things that rollerball consists of are going to be all up here, but we get some of this stuff too. We're just going to make sure we bring it all in so we don't lose anything that they wanted. But what I was going to say is bringing in, do one thing at a time, especially when you're in network programming. GONet does a lot of great things for you, but at the same time you have to approach programming, and especially network programming, and kind of do one thing at a time and test it and see where you're at before you get too far along in a path. I think I've already imported everything we need. Yep, there it is. It's the completed game. I'm going to go ahead and close this. So in the mantra of doing one thing at a time and testing it out, let's test the baseline functionality. So we're going to open up their scene, rollerball. Here's what it looks like. We can navigate around, standard Unity functionality. And then let's take a look at our game view and just go ahead and hit play. So this demo is it's fairly simple, which is why we chose this for GONet tutorial 1. Make it multiplayer, so you can see a single player game. I go around, you win. I got 12 of them. You can see the count here. Excuse me. You can see the count. I won, and I can navigate with the WASD keys. I'm assuming possibly the arrow keys as well. Yes. So it looks like it's adding some force to this ball. It's probably a rigid body. So that's it. So we've proven out the baseline functionality. And now what we want to do is go to the asset store and bring in GONet. Import it, do all the fun stuff, let it compile. So here we are. I'm going to go ahead and do a search for GONet. There it is. I've looked at it before, but we're going to go ahead and click that. It's free. That's the one we're looking for. Currently at version 1.04. Go ahead and import it. It's going to bring up the list of all the assets, and there are quite a few of them there. There's a lot of source code. That is the very large bulk of what we're going to see here. As you see, we've got bouncy castle cryptography for encryption, decryption. There's a ton of stuff in here that actually doesn't get used. There's all sorts of encryption options that we've only selected one of to use for the initial implementation for GONet, but there's all sorts of things that you could get into eventually later. GONet is going to provide the bulk of all of the excellent functionality that we put together for you. We've got a couple of other libraries here, message pack for serialization, and then we've got our netcode UDP and reliable UDP layers here. And this is, we want all this, we want to bring in all the samples, just everything. I always just double click on that to make sure we're getting everything. So as this goes through and imports, it's going to be your standard Unity import process. You know, it's got to import scripts, compile scripts, get all the meta files squared away, and then now it's imported, and we're left with some things here, and that's what I want to talk about. Some of these are going to go away. These are just warnings, but some of these are errors. In fact, they're compile errors. And one of the things that we've provided under GONet is the GONet setup guide. So, whoops, I'm going to double click that because it has some important information in here that we're going to need to follow to get this to do correctly. So we've got to ensure that the unsaved code is allowed, and we're going to do that now. Project settings, player, in other settings, we've got allow unsafe code. I know that may sound a little bit dangerous and scary, but some of the code and optimizations that you can do that the C# language allows is considered unsafe, but it's just in relation to how memory is managed. So don't get too concerned about it, and a lot of optimizations within C# are not going to be possible unless you use unsafe code. But you can go read up about it at Microsoft, and it'll maybe ease some of your qualms if you're feeling a little bit concerned about that. But that's definitely necessary for GONet. The next one is the .NET API version. We want to bring that up to the .NET 4.x because it starts off as the .NET standard, and there's additional libraries that we want to make use of in the 4.x line. And as these changes are being made, it goes and recompiles the entire project based on these new settings, because it does change the compilation path that it goes down. Now here's an optional step. I'm going to go ahead and do it. This right here, this text, is going to go as scripting define symbols that tells the compiler some pre-compile directives, and if I hit enter on that, once again it's going to compile. So this is an interesting feature of GONet. We use the log4net logging framework, which is a pretty well-known kind of stack. It's got implementations in Java, C++ as well. But one thing about C# is that these scripting define symbols, if they're not here, if I take all of this out, it recompiles the entire code base, and we can talk about it more later, but it can take all of our GONet logging statements out of the compilation altogether, so that if one day down the line you are going to create your production build and you want to completely optimize it and you're not interested in creating logs and writing to the file, then you could just take all of this out and it'll recompile, and now the log statements in the code actually are not going to get executed at all. It won't even be in the DLL. So yeah, so we've got all these things done. So we did what we said we were going to do. Now we clear it out and it's completely empty of errors and warnings. So I think we're all good. We're imported, compiled, and we're ready to start making this thing a multiplayer game. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to open up the assets, the GONet menu under resources, GONet. We've got a couple of things in here that are useful. The first thing that every GONet game is going to require is a GONet global context. So since this game here is just roll-a-ball scene, it's not a multi-scene experience or game, we're just going to grab that and drop it in here. Whoops. Just drop it right there at the root. It could be anywhere. I could have dropped it down here at the bottom. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's in here. And what we want to do is have that in the first scene that loads up. It has don't destroy on load, and we'll see that in a minute, and it sticks around. And this provides the entry point into all things GONet. So after you have the global context in the scene, we need to start thinking about what types of things do we even want to network in this case. So the overall goal would be, let's have multiple balls. Each player will have their own ball and maybe they compete for going to grab the things that are in the scene. So the way that we would do that is we would kind of spawn our ball at runtime. So in order to get this ball to be player specific, we don't necessarily want it to show up in the scene right here. What we want to do is take it out of the scene and spawn it in kind of immediately at runtime for each of the clients who connect to this multiplayer experience. So, but before we do that, we want to keep all the properties of this thing. So we essentially want to turn this into a prefab. And one of the things about GONet is that in order to spawn things, we've got to go ahead and add them into a resources folder. So we're going to create a resources folder under here so that it can spawn at runtime. And you see that save and load? This is all part of some of the mechanisms. So if you start seeing save and load pop up as you're manipulating things that are GONet related, don't get worried about it. We use some design time, which means in your editor while you're moving things around, you're designing your game and implementing things. You will see those things pop up, and that's GONet doing some code generation and some things under the covers so that your runtime when you hit play performs much better. So there's no byte weaving or any slow reflection occurring. If you're familiar with C# reflection, that's not going to be happening. So we've got our resources folder. We're going to go ahead and grab this player. We're going to drag him up, create a prefab. So now we've got a prefab. We want to take that player out of the scene. And one of the things that this GONet global context has on it is it has a prefab here. So it has a prefab for the server and a prefab for the client, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the one that this authority prefab, I don't know if you've dealt with networking much at all, but there's a concept of authority, and over any GONet participant or any game object in the scene that's going to be networked, which we refer to in GONet as GONetParticipant. As you can see, the global context is a GONet participant as well. That's what links it in to GONet and gets everything networked. We have this concept of authority. So whoever has authority over a particular game object or a GONet participant is going to be able to control the data. It's the source of all the changes that every other person in the multiplayer game is going to receive the information from the authority. So this prefab that we want to spawn is the player itself. But actually, you know what? Let's select this. I forgot to mention. So this is the prefab as it sat. We're going to open it up, and we're going to see it's just got that one level to it. In order to make that a GONet friendly game object, all we need to do is add the GONet participant to it. And it'll ask us if we want to save. It'll reload. We'll go down and do that. And now we've got GONet participant on it, and you can see that by default we've got some options here, and we do want this particular guy. It's going to be moving around. That's one of the neat things that it does. Whereas if you recall, back over here in the GONet global, this thing doesn't move around. This is kind of just a global concept, so we just leave that alone. But if we go back to our player, open that up, we want to synchronize the position and the rotation, so we'll go ahead and click both of these. Go back to the scene. So now we can drop this thing in because it needs to have GONet participant on it. So now it knows that this prefab is going to be spawned, and I'll show you in the code in just a moment how I know that, because we have this sample spawner. We can go into the code. We've got a couple of things in here. We've got some command line arguments that get parsed out that you'll see momentarily on whether or not we want to start a server or a client, and it's fairly easy. But I want to show you that that particular authority prefab that we just dropped in there, in the update loop, we're looking for, if you hold down the left Alt key and P, then it's going to instantiate that prefab at the position and rotation of the spawner itself. So that is going to be important to remember, because actually one thing that I forgot to jot down was the location of the player that we want to do, because now the spawner, we need to make sure that he's at that location, but I happen to recall that it's 0.50. And you'll see that that is about where it was, and like I said, I do remember that it was there. So now the spawner's in the correct place. If I hit play, if I hit left Alt and P, I can spawn a player, and it will be a networked thing. But let's just show that that's the case. We're going to maximize on play. So as you would expect, like we saw, I took the player out. There's no player here. So now I've spawned him in, and I can do the same thing that we did last time, if I were any good at the game, that is. So let me just quickly show you that it's the same thing. You can tell that it looks pretty much the same. You can bounce off the wall. Okay, and I win. Cool. So same thing, you can see there's an unassigned reference down here. We're going to work out some of these problems, and these are exactly the types of problems that everybody's going to be running into as you take GONet, you take your game, and you start introducing a multiplayer concepts into it. You've got to really rethink about how you put your game together. So we're just scrolling out errors about this camera controller. Well, why is that? Let's think about what that might be caused by. Well, the camera controller, which is on this player prefab, there's a player controller. I'm sorry. I need it. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the main camera has the camera controller on it. So, and this is used to follow this guy around. But guess what? there's no player here because we took it out of the scene. So main camera, camera controller, it doesn't have any clue, and I can't drop this down in here. That doesn't make sense because that's from the project, and this needs to be something that's in the scene, right? So once this player gets spawned and put in the hierarchy, then that's what we want to go over there, and that's what we'll do now. So in the start, we don't actually want to create an offset because we don't have a player, and that's what continues to scroll in the logs. So if we go over here, I've already gone through this process in another window, and this is what the final result is going to look like. So I'm going to copy this little guy. Actually, we could just go over it piece by piece. But you can see GONetBehaviour is what it extends. So GONetBehaviour is a new base class that we can use to get access to certain events and lifecycle things that happen during initialization of different GONet participants and other things, like when a server or client status is known. So let's do that. We did the GONetBehaviour, and now that's going to give us the start method is being hidden by this guy, which okay. So that's being hidden by these virtual methods. So we need to come over here and we need to do an override. Yeah. Override the start. And anytime you override, you want to call base to do proper object-oriented programming. So now that is that. And player doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore, because we want it to only be for my player. Since a camera controller is going to be present and there's going to be multiple players, we have to only do this for my player. But actually, one thing I wanted to point out over here is we're no longer using the start method, because what we want to do is we want to say, when a new GONet participant starts, then we check to see if it's mine, and if it is the player, then we make my player that guy's game object. Then we can use my player to figure out what this offset is, right? That's essentially what we were doing here before we changed player to my player. So let's just go ahead and do that. And copy this guy. Notice this is an override method, but it's going to replace the start because we only want it to happen when a new GONet participant is started and added into the scene. So now this is going to give us the new offset based on my player. In fact, we probably could change that to my offset just to be 100% clear. So now the only other thing is to put that guard check around to make sure that we're dealing with a non-null my player, because the other player might spawn in who's not going to be mine, so this my player wouldn't be set. So we only want late update, which is called every frame, to be updating his position based on his offset if it's my player. So now we're pretty set, and my player doesn't need to be public anymore because it's not set in the scene. So now we've converted this to a GONet behavior instead of a mono behavior, which gives us this abstract method that we can override that gets called every time a GONet participant is started, which is a new GONet participant added into the scene, and its start method is called. Make sure you call base. Then we can check to see if that GONet participant that is being added or started, IsMine, and if it's a player, and then we have all these things. So now that's going to give us the proper behavior for the camera controller and to avoid all those errors scrolling in the log. We just need to give it a chance to compile, and then we can run that one more time. By the way, something I did not point out when I last ran is, in order for, I didn't just hit play and then hit Alt P. I actually hit play Alt S and then Alt P, and I'll show you the reason why. The GONet sample spawner that's sitting on the GONet global sample spawner and GONet global context. This guy's, so there's no concept of a server yet. You don't see any terminology here that says anything about server unless you're looking at the spawner. The spawner it has a prefab to the server and a prefab to the client. And when you're in the editor, you don't have that command line option to look for -server or -client, which we'll talk about in a minute. But since you don't have that command line stuff, you've got to have some other mechanism. So for now, just for getting something off the ground, we're going to do left Alt and then S and make sure we haven't already spawned it. Then we're going to instantiate that server prefab. So that's, I did that last time, I just didn't mention it. So we're going to do that this time one more time. We're going to hit play. So I'm going to hit Alt S. Now that's going to spawn the server, which I'm going to go ahead and take that off. Actually put it back on, but just minimize it for now. So I want you to see a couple of things. Global context is now down in Don't Destroy on Load. And now we've got the GONet sample server. And that's what the global context had up here, and that's what we Alt S, and then we spawned it. I'm not going to talk really about the local, but it's another thing that every machine in the multiplayer game is going to spawn. It's not tremendously important. So we're just going to see that there's a server because I hit Alt S. And I'll just keep it minimized for now. And I'm also going to focus in there and hit Alt P. And so now we've got, we don't have those scrolling errors. We do have another error in there, and we're going to come take a look at that and figure out why that is. But bottom line is, we don't have a million scrolls like we did last time. And let's just go ahead and stop that and check and see what this is about. So we've got a null reference exception, and we're going to go into this code, and we're probably going to see exactly what that's all about. So it seemed that every time the ball was touching one of those little special objects, what do they call it? I don't even really remember. Pickups, just pickups, okay. So when the ball was hitting a pickup, that's when these were starting to print. So the player controller has some logic in here, and it took us right here, if I'm not mistaken, to 72, yeah. So, oh, okay, well, count text, so I wonder what would have been null. So we've got two of these guys up here, count text and win text, and that's sitting on the player controller, that's up here. So player controller, count text and win text, oh no, those are none now. Well, I wonder why that is. That's because count text and win text are both going to be right here. They're in the scene. I cannot drag those over here because that would make no sense at all. Like it won't even, well, hold on, let me scroll down. Yeah, so count text, oh, well, you know, because that's a prefab and I'm coming from the hierarchy. You can't do that. That's not a Unity thing. So we've got to figure out another mechanism to get this information into a player that we spawn at runtime. So since we're not going to be able to drag those in like that, I don't want them to be public anymore to confuse anybody, so they won't see those anymore over there and think that you can drag some stuff onto it. But what we do want to do is we'll just we'll find it at runtime. So you can, since this is on the player, this start method is not going to get called until after you hit Alt P and spawn the player. So I know that when this thing starts, I can go look for anything in the scene that I want to. So we can go find it. And what was it? It's called count text. And then dot text. Whoops, get component. Text, right? It's a text. Whoops. Right, so we want to do the same thing for the next one. There's win text, I believe. So now, and I don't really like this too much. If you've got some experience with C# garbage collection, and especially inside of the Unity game engine, you're going to know that just having string literals thrown around, and it's going to create garbage. It's not very nice. So I'll just try to be a good Samaritan there and teach you about that stuff too. I guess if I start, then I can't stop. Right, okay. Especially in fixed update, it's really a lot more important than in start, because fixed update's called, I mean, depending on your fixed settings, it's going to be called many, many times. So let's just do that. All right, cool. Man, it's just this code. I don't know why, like, this is Unity code. I would really want them not to have to do that, but that's not the point. But there you go. Okay, so what we did was count text and win text. We went and looked those up from the scene, so we don't run into that error. So now the player is going to spawn, it's going to go to the scene, it's going to find these two guys, and now we're going to have real good references to those. So by the timeline, which is now 82, gets hit, this is not a null, this is not a null, right? So let's just double check that that is true. I'm going to hit run. Just like last time and every other time, because we're in the editor, we're going to Alt-S. Now I'm a server, Alt-P, get my player in the scene. And now you can see the count is increasing, and there's no red error messages down here. So let's just go ahead and win, so you can see the win text. We spawned our player, we set the text by looking it up, and now we get you win. All right, cool. So we've handled that. We haven't proven that anything's multiplayer yet. I just wanted to baseline, we kind of got back to where we were without any errors, but now we've got some GONet stuff and we're spawning in the player. So now we will be ready to add in a second player, right? So I would love to do that now. In order to do that, we need to go ahead and create a build. That's the only way to test multiplayer situations. Let's create a build. Let's go to Rollerball build. You can see there was a couple of them in there. Yeah, I should have probably cleared out that build directory prior to, because it looked like I had another one in there. But hopefully it won't muddy the water too much. So this is our build. It's great. I'm going to delete these as well. So this is what you would see. You would have built that. This is what you would see. And we've offered you a little neat thing inside of Streaming Assets, GONet, these two little convenience batch files, which is going to work only for Windows, so I apologize if you're on another platform. We'll be getting more of this stuff rolled out later. But if you are on Windows and you can run batch files, drop those over here at the same level, the base of your build where Rollerball GONet exists. And I'm going to copy that and open these two guys, because you're going to need to edit. You're going to need to edit those and change GONet Sandbox with the name of your executable, which is in this case is Rollerball GONet. Rollerball GONet. So now we've got those two guys sitting there waiting for us. And now, I guess I didn't really put a lot of focus on that, but you can see that dash server on the server one, and then the dash client on the client one, which if you recall, if we go look at the sampler, go back to process command line, which it does on start for GONet sample spawner, it looks for dash server, it looks for dash client, and it instantiates the one automatically according to that. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to start up the server first, which is very important when you're in a multiplayer situation. We're going to start it up a little bit smaller in a windowed mode and put the left-hand side is going to be the server. So I do not have to hit Alt-S now, and if I did, it would recognize that the server's already there and it wouldn't do anything. But when you're in the build and you're using these batch files, there's no need for Alt-S. So I can, in fact, go ahead and Alt-P, and now I've got my player in here, and I'm going to kind of move over here so that you can see one of the cool things is as soon as I get the client going, he's automatically going to notice that there's a player in the scene already, and that's the other player over here from the server. I don't have my own player, so I'm focused in here and I'm pressing the keys right now. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm pressing WASD and it's not doing anything. I'm going to come over here and click on that, and now I can WASD and I'm moving around. Go back here, nothing. Go back here, I can move. So if you recall, that's because the player controller, or I'm sorry, it must be, yeah, it's this guy. So the camera, that's kind of hilarious. Yeah, I don't have, so if I hit Alt-P, now I've got a player over here, and I just so happen to be controlling both of them. Why is that? Well, let's figure it out. It's probably because we didn't put any guards on who's getting controlled by what. And that's what we need to account for now. Because I was just saying that a minute ago, and I was like, well, we didn't really put any controls in here. So that's one thing that we want to do. And the cool thing about that is there's already a built-in mechanism, because this player is a rigid body. And if you're familiar with rigid body, you can set IsKinematic to true and turn gravity off, and then now you can control the position and rotation and aspects of its movement through scripting that's not really linked into the physics aspect of it, really, which means that's what a non-authority. So if I spawn my player, I'm going to leave gravity on and leave IsKinematic off, but the other player is going to see me without gravity and IsKinematic true. The reason behind that is how that happens is through this particular guy right here on the GONetParticipant. We want to turn this on. So there's kind of a long explanation as to what this actually means. But basically we want to say this rigid body is only controlled by the owner. Yes. Okay. And I would think that on any GONet participant where there's a rigid body, that's exactly what you would want. So that the other people, they're going to have gravity off, they're going to have IsKinematic on, and you're going to sync position and rotation, and you're just going to get everything that you need. So we can do that, and let's just go check the code and see if there's anything in the player controller that we need to do some guarding around. All right, so fixed update add force. That is going to be taking place for everybody regardless of who owns it. So there's something that we need to do, which is we've got this GONetParticipantCompanionBehaviour that we can extend that will only work when the player controller, the thing that extends this, has to be installed at the same level as GONetParticipant is installed. And if you look right here on PlayerController is installed at the same level as GONetParticipant, so we're good to go. So what that's going to do for us, if you go look at that, this definition is abstract, and it has a GONetParticipant that is protected, that's automatically looked up for us when this thing is in the awake method. So now I should be able to copy that and reference this because it's protected. I'm in a child class of it. Now I can say inside of fixed update, I can reference that, and I can say, hey, that little handy dandy IsMine check is something that we can do. And now we've wrapped that. So that should be all that we need. Oh yeah, see, I've got to come back for that. Either way, but you'll see that this has, the start method has a little bit of a warning here, and it says that it hides the inherited member, and that's because this thing overrides GONet, or it implements, or extends rather, GONetBehaviour, which is another class that we can talk about a little bit later, but it has a virtual awake and a virtual start method, which means you can't just call start anymore. Now you want to do override start. And every time, just like in object-oriented programming, if you override something and it's an abstract method, you need to call base on it, just to be the object-oriented proper way of doing business. So now we've got a GONetParticipant. It's the one that's on the same level as this player controller, and we're checking if it is mine, and that should give us the desired behavior we're looking for, so that I'm only controlling my ball, my player. Go ahead and create a build because we want to test. Oh, did I? That's interesting. So that is one thing that's interesting about multiplayer development. GONet makes it fairly easy with those batch files, and then the spawner, you just get the client after you get your server, and you can spawn up even, 100 clients if you wanted to test at a larger scale, run it on multiple machines, no problem. So what did we get this time? The build failed. I probably need to close these windows here. That is one thing that's peculiar about Unity. So yes, I don't have Windows Explorer open to some folder inside of the build, which I think that's what it was complaining about. It had no other reason not to be able to build. Another reason why it won't build, by the way, sometimes if you ever run into that failure, is if you're somehow still running the build somewhere, like you left either the client or the server running. So now that I closed just Windows Explorer, it's able to figure it out. So let's do the server. Put him on the left again. I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to hit Alt-P. That's my dude. Kind of move him over here, just kind of like we did last time. It's the servers guy, client. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click over here. I'm hitting the WASD to move around. Nothing happens. WASD over here. Yes, it does. Now, the thing that was not correct last time was once I come back over here, Alt-P, see now I'm WASD and I'm only controlling my guy. That's exactly what we wanted. So let's start picking up some of these. So here's the interesting thing. Well, you can't actually see. Oh, that's another thing. So the camera is following my guy. That's because of the code that we put in there. But this guy is not following my guy, so you can't really see all the stuff that I'm picking up. However, you can see the residue of the count at 7 because there's no code in there to differentiate between. So I'm going to go ahead and stop rolling this guy around. I'll put him kind of up here somewhere, and then come back over here, and you'll see this is still this is networked now. This is totally networked. These guys can, play around with each other, but the count, as it appears, has gone down to 4. So this guy got 7. This guy got 4. Or was it 8? It was probably 8 and 4. So now we've got to figure out that logic. His count should only be for him, and his count should only be for him. And now no one's won because somehow the count's at 4, which is not the total number. So let's go ahead and kill that. But basically, you could just stop right there and congratulate yourself. Like, that's a full multiplayer experience. That was not too terribly difficult. You just add in GONet global context, take your player out of the scene, drop them up here in the resource, add GONetParticipant to him, and make sure that you're going to want to sync the position and the rotation. And since it's got a rigid body, we went ahead and said that only the owner should be rigid body. In fact, I didn't really show you at runtime what that ends up doing because we were in the build. I couldn't show you in the editor, but if I were on the server, the player that gets spawned on the server for the client would have had these reversed. But we need to leave it like this because this is the representation for the owner. And then GONet determines, based on this flag being set at runtime, that it needs to do the right thing. And that's how we were able to only control our own, in addition to adding this IsMine check in there, right? So we added the player up here, came back here, dropped the player over here as our authority prefab, and then we took the player out of the scene, and now that's essentially, with this additional little bit of IsMine checks, and then making sure that the controller, or the camera controller, is only following my player and not the other person's player, and we use the event subscription system to accomplish that. So that's the baseline bit of functionality. I'm going to come back in and we're going to fix up these scores, but for now, that should get you going. That's fast. You get Rollerball, you import in GONet, you move a couple of things around, change the code, make sure you're only manipulating things that you own, and then you can just go at it. So I think that's a good place to kind of cut this off, and we'll move into more interesting things even more and more as we go. So thanks a lot.